The Summer of Waiting by Sylvester Fourroux. Mobile, Alabama, 1950. The heat that summer came up from the ground like something alive, shimmering off the crushed oyster shell driveway and making the air thick enough to chew. I was 9 years old, skinny as a fence post, and every morning I'd wake up in my grandparents' house on Mildred Street, wondering if this would be the day we'd get word about joining my father in Japan. The ceiling fan in the bedroom I shared with my little brother Skipper would turn lazy circles overhead, doing nothing but moving the hot air from one corner to another. And I'd lie there, listening to the mockingbirds raising hell in the magnolia tree outside, thinking about a man I could barely remember anymore. It had been 8 months since Daddy shipped out to Itazuki Air Base. 8 months of letters on thin paper that crinkled when you unfolded them. 8 months of Mama reading his words aloud at the dinner table, while Marie, Skipper, and I tried to picture what Japan looked like, what it smelled like, whether the fish there were anything like the ones in Dog River. 8 months of waiting. But that summer, that particular summer of 1950, turned out to be something else entirely. It became the summer I learned that waiting could be its own kind of adventure, that family could mean more than just the people you were born to, and that some memories would stick to your ribs, like my grandmother's peach cobbler, sweet and substantial and impossible to forget. The house on Mildred Street was a white clapboard two-story with a wraparound porch that caught whatever breeze decided to wander in from Mobile Bay. My grandfather had bought it in 1928, back when he first started working for the Gulf, Mobile, and Ohio Railroad, and every board in that house seemed to hold a story. The porch swing creaked in a particular way that meant rain was coming. The third step on the front stairs groaned like an old hound dog if you stepped on the left side. The screen door had a spring that sang a high note when you opened it and a low note when it closed, and I must have heard that two-note song 1,000 times that summer. Grandpa Boudreau, Mama's father, was a compact man with hands like leather and eyes that crinkled at the corners from years of squinting at teletype machines in the railroad office. He worked the night shift most weeks, operating the teletypewriter that clattered out messages about freight cars and schedules and delays, his fingers dancing over the keys like he was playing some kind of industrial piano. He'd come home at dawn smelling like machine oil and coffee, and if the timing was right, if I woke up early enough, he'd look at me across the breakfast table and say, "Boy, them fish been callin' my name all night long. You hear 'em?" And I'd say, "Yes, sir, I hear 'em," even though I hadn't heard anything but Skipper snoring in the bed next to mine. "Well then," he'd say, standing up and draining his coffee cup, "I reckon we better go answer 'em before they get their feelings hurt." The Gospel according to Grandpa. Grandpa Boudreau had a 1946 Hudson, same year as ours, though his was a deep green that looked almost black in certain light, and he kept his fishing gear in the trunk, like some men kept tools. We'd load up before the sun got too high, back when the air still had a little mercy in it, and head down to Dog River, or sometimes over to Ward's Canal, looking for the secret spots where the lily pads grew thick and the largemouth bass, which everybody in Mobile called green trout, for reasons nobody could quite explain, liked to hide. "Now listen here," Grandpa would say as we motored along in that Hudson, windows down, warm air buffeting our faces. "A green trout ain't like your regular fish. He's got dignity. He's got pride. You can't just throw any old thing in the water and expect him to bite. You got to think like a green trout thinks." "How's a green trout think, Grandpa?" "Well, that's the question, ain't it?" He'd grin at me, one hand on the wheel, the other arm hanging out the window. "A green trout, he's sittin' under them lily pads, stayin' cool, mindin' his own business. He ain't hungry exactly, but he ain't full neither. He's comfortable. So you got to show him something that makes him forget about comfortable. Something that makes him say, 'Now that right there is worth leavin' my spot for.'" I'd nod like I understood, though mostly I was just excited to be going fishing, to be out of the house, to be doing something that felt like an adventure, even if it was just a few miles from home. Dog River in the morning was a different world. The water lay still and dark, reflecting the sky like hammered pewter, and the cypress trees stood in the shallows, with their knees poking up like old men waiting. Grandpa would ease the Hudson down a dirt road that was more suggestion than actual road, park under a live oak draped with Spanish moss, and we'd haul our gear down to the water's edge. He had a wooden boat he kept chained to a tree, just a flat-bottomed skiff with peeling green paint and a small outboard motor that coughed and sputtered before it caught. "She's temperamental," Grandpa would say, pulling the starter cord. "Like your grandmother before her first cup of coffee." The motor would cough again, sputter, then finally roar to life, settling into a put-put-put rhythm that scattered the herons and sent ripples across the glassy water. We'd motor out slow, Grandpa standing in the back working the tiller, me sitting up front trying to spot the lily pad clusters he was looking for. The air smelled like mud and fish and growing things, that particular bayou smell that's half decay and half life, all mixed together in a way that shouldn't work but somehow does. "There," Grandpa would say, pointing with his chin. "See them pads? Big ones? With them purple flowers? That's where he's at. Old Mr. Green Trout. He's under there right now, just waiting for us to make our presentation." He always called it a presentation, like we were giving a speech or performing a play. And in a way, I suppose we were. Grandpa would cut the motor and we'd drift, and he'd show me how to cast the line just so, how to let the lure, usually a purple plastic worm or a silver spinner, land soft as a whisper near the edge of the pads. "Easy now," he'd murmur. "You ain't throwing rocks at a tin can. You're inviting him to dinner." The waiting was the hardest part. Sitting there in that boat with the sun climbing higher, sweat starting to trickle down my back, watching the line, watching the water, waiting for that moment when everything would explode into action. Grandpa could wait forever. He'd sit there patient as a heron, occasionally taking a sip from his thermos of coffee, humming some old tune under his breath. Then it would happen, that sudden strike, that jolt that went up the line and into your hands and straight into your heart. The water would erupt and there he'd be, Mr. Green Trout himself, all muscle and fury, fighting like he knew exactly what was at stake. "Keep your tip up," Grandpa would holler. "Don't let him get back under them pads. That's it, that's it. You got him, boy, you got him." And when I'd finally haul that fish into the boat, maybe 2 pounds, maybe 3, green and gold and beautiful, Grandpa would laugh and slap his knee and say, "Now that's what I'm talking about. That fish right there, he's going to make your grandmother smile." And let me tell you something. Boy, a man who can make his woman smile with a mess of fish, that's a man who's got his priorities straight. We'd fish until the sun got too high and the fish stopped biting, then motor back to the landing with our catch on a stringer, the green trout flashing in the water beside the boat. Grandpa would clean them right there on a wooden table under the oak tree, his knife flashing quick and sure, and he'd tell me stories about fishing with his own father, about the Depression years when a string of fish meant the difference between eating and not eating, about how the river had changed over the years, but the fish stayed pretty much the same. "A fish don't care about politics," he'd say, scraping scales. "Don't care about wars, or hard times, or good times. A fish just wants to eat and make more fish and not get caught. There's a lesson in that somewhere, though I'll be damned if I know exactly what it is." Downtown with Grandma. While Grandpa and I were communing with the green trout, Grandma Boudreaux was running her own operations with Marie and Skipper. Grandma was a small woman with iron-gray hair she wore in a tight bun, and she had a way of organizing the world that made you think maybe God had consulted with her before setting things in motion. She kept a spotless house, put up more preserves than any family could eat in 2 years, and believed firmly that children needed structure, fresh air, and regular doses of culture. Culture, in Grandma's vocabulary, meant trips downtown to the shops on Dauphin Street, visits to the soda fountain at Cress's Five and Dime, and matinee showings at the Roosevelt Theater. Marie, who was 11 and thought she was practically grown, loved these expeditions. She'd come back to the house with shopping bags and stories about the dresses she'd seen, the hats, the shoes, the ladies who lunched at the Battle House Hotel. Grandma would let her order a large milkshake at the soda fountain chocolate always chocolate, and Marie would make it last for an hour, taking tiny sips and watching the people go by like she was studying for some kind of test on human behavior. Skipper, who was only 6 and built like a fireplug, mostly cared about the Roosevelt Theater. He'd sit through anything: westerns, musicals, newsreels, cartoons, just happy to be in the dark with a bag of popcorn and the giant screen flickering above him. Grandma said he had the attention span of a hummingbird, except when it came to movies, and then he could sit still for hours. I went with him sometimes, when Grandpa was sleeping after his night shift, and I had to admit there was something magical about downtown Mobile in 1950. The streets were busy with people who all seemed to know each other, stopping to chat on corners, calling out greetings across the street. The shop windows were full of things we couldn't afford, but could look at toys and clothes and appliances that gleamed like promises. The air smelled like roasting peanuts from the street vendors, and perfume from the department stores, and exhaust from the buses that rumbled past. But mostly I preferred the fishing trips with Grandpa. There was something about being out on the water, away from people and buildings, and the complicated business of civilization that made sense to me in a way nothing else did. Maybe it was because I was fighting the Korea streetvitis dance, the doctor called it, which made it sound almost fun, though there was nothing fun about it. Twice a week, Mama had to take me to Dr. Henderson's office for shots that made me sick for hours afterward, my muscles twitching and jerking like I was a puppet with tangled strings. Out on the water with Grandpa, though, I could almost forget about the Korea. The twitching didn't matter when you were fighting a fish. The jerking didn't matter when you were watching the sunrise paint the sky pink and orange over Dog River. Out there, I was just a boy fishing with his grandfather, and that was enough. The hamster incident. I need to tell you about the hamster, because it's been eating at me for 60-some years, and maybe writing it down will help, though I doubt it. Skipper had gotten the hamster for his birthday in March, a fat little butterscotch-colored thing he named Buddy. He loved that hamster with the kind of pure, uncomplicated love that only a 6-year-old can manage. He'd carry the cage around the house, showing Buddy to anyone who'd look. He'd save bits of his dinner to feed him. He'd fall asleep with his face pressed against the cage, watching Buddy run on his wheel. I thought the hamster was stupid. I thought Skipper was stupid for loving it so much. I was 9 years old and dealing with the Korea and missing my father and feeling generally angry at the world. And somehow, all that anger focused itself on a 3-ounce rodent that had never done anything to anybody. It was a Tuesday morning in June. Mama had taken Marie downtown to buy her new shoes. Grandma was in the kitchen canning figs, and the whole house smelled like sugar and fruit. Grandpa was asleep upstairs after his night shift. Skipper was in the backyard digging holes. For some reason, only he understood. I went into the room we shared and looked at Buddy in his cage. He looked back at me with his little black eyes, whiskers twitching, and something in me just snapped. I took him out of the cage. He was warm and soft, and his heart was beating fast against my palm. I carried him to the bathroom, lifted the toilet lid, and dropped him in. He swam in circles, his little legs paddling frantically, and I flushed. Just like that. I flushed Skipper's hamster down the toilet. Then I went and found Marie, who had just gotten back from downtown, and I told her that Buddy had escaped from his cage, and I'd seen her chasing him toward the bathroom. I said I'd heard the toilet flush. I said I was pretty sure she'd done something terrible. Marie's face went white, then red, then white again. She started crying, saying she hadn't done anything. She'd just gotten home. It wasn't her fault. But Skipper believed me. He was 6 years old, and I was his big brother. And when I said I'd seen Marie near the bathroom, he believed me. He cried for 3 days. Marie cried too, from anger and injustice. Mama tried to sort out what had happened, but I stuck to my story. And eventually, everyone just accepted that Buddy was gone, and it was probably an accident, and these things happen. But Marie knew. She couldn't prove it, but she knew. And she's never quite forgiven me, even now, even after all these years. Sometimes at family gatherings, she'll look at me a certain way, and I know she's thinking about Buddy the hamster. and I want to tell her, I'm sorry. I was 9 years old, and sick, and angry, and stupid, but the words never quite make it out of my mouth. That's the thing about being a kid. You do things without thinking about how they'll echo down through the years, how a moment of meanness can become a permanent stain on your soul. If I could go back and talk to that 9-year-old boy, I'd tell him that anger is like a poison you drink, hoping someone else will die. I'd tell him that little brothers and their hamsters deserve better. I'd tell him a lot of things. But I can't go back. None of us can. We just have to live with what we've done and try to do better going forward. Thursday morning. It was a Thursday in late June when everything changed. The heat had settled in for real by then, the kind of heat that made the tar in the street corners go soft and sticky. We'd been in Mobile for 8 months, and the waiting had become a kind of routine. We waited for letters. We waited for news. We waited for word about when we'd finally get to join Daddy in Japan. That morning we were playing hide-and-seek in the yard, me and Marie and Skipper and a couple of neighbor kids. I was it, counting to 50, with my face pressed against the trunk of the magnolia tree, when I heard the sound of a car coming down Mildred Street. Nothing unusual about that, except this car slowed down, then stopped, then a door slammed. I opened my eyes and turned around, and there was a taxi in the driveway, a yellow cab, bright as a canary in the morning sun. And getting out of the back seat, paying the driver, was a man in an Air Force uniform. For a second I didn't recognize him. He was thinner than I remembered, more weathered, his face tanned dark from the Japanese sun. But then he turned and saw us standing there in the yard, frozen like we'd been playing a different kind of game, and he smiled. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, and his voice was exactly the same, that Cajun accent that turned words into music. "Y'all just gonna stand there? Or somebody gonna come give they daddy a hug?" Marie screamed, just opened her mouth and screamed like she'd seen a ghost, then took off running across the yard. Skipper was right behind her, his little legs pumping. I stood there for another second, my brain trying to catch up with what my eyes were seeing, and then I was running too. He caught all 3 of us in his arms, went down on one knee in the grass, and held us while we cried and laughed and tried to talk all at once. He smelled different, like airplane and cigarettes and something else, something foreign, but his arms felt the same, strong and safe, and his laugh was the same, big and booming and full of joy. "Where's your mama?" he asked. And before we could answer, the screen door sang its 2-note song, and there she was. Mama stood on the porch with one hand over her mouth, wearing the yellow dress she'd been ironing when we went outside to play. She looked young suddenly, younger than I'd ever seen her, and the expression on her face was something I didn't have words for then and barely have words for now. It was surprise and joy and relief and love all mixed together, and maybe a little bit of anger too, because he hadn't told her he was coming, hadn't warned her, had just shown up like a miracle in a taxi. "Louis," she said, and it came out like a prayer. "Cher," he said back, which was what he always called her. And then he was up the porch steps, and she was in his arms, and we kids were dancing around them like puppies. And Grandma came out of the kitchen with her hands covered in fig juice, and Grandpa came down the stairs in his undershirt, woken by the commotion, and everyone was talking and crying and laughing all at once. Daddy had a month's leave, 30 days before he had to go back to Itazuki, 30 days that felt like a gift from God himself. The Cajun has landed. My father, Louis Thibodeau, was from a little town outside Lafayette, Louisiana, where they spoke more French than English, and the food could make you weep with joy. He joined the Air Force in 1942, met my mother at a USO dance in Pensacola, and married her 3 weeks later, because, as he liked to say, when you know, and I knew. His accent was thick as gumbo, and he peppered his speech with French phrases that sometimes made sense and sometimes didn't. "Mais yeah," he'd say, which meant yes, but with enthusiasm. "Ça c'est bon," which meant that's good. "Fais doudou," which meant go to sleep, but sounded like a party. And when he was really excited or really angry, he'd slip into full Cajun French that none of us could understand, but we got the gist of anyway. That first day home, after the reunion and the tears and the explanations, he'd gotten emergency leave because his mother was sick, though she'd recovered by the time he got stateside. And he'd decided to surprise us. Rather than call ahead, we all sat around Grandma's dining room table for a lunch that turned into dinner. Grandma had pulled out all the stops: fried chicken, butter beans, sliced tomatoes from the garden, cornbread, sweet tea so cold it made your teeth hurt. Daddy ate like a man who'd been starving, which maybe he had been, at least for this kind of food. "Lord have mercy," he said, reaching for another piece of chicken. "Madame Boudreau, you still the best cook in Mobile County. Maybe the best cook in Alabama. Maybe the best cook in the whole damn South. Pardon my French." "That ain't French," Grandpa said, grinning. "That's just cussin'." "Well, I know plenty of that too," Daddy said. "Both kinds." He wanted to know everything. What we'd been doing, what we'd been learning, how we'd been helping Mama and the grandparents. He listened to Marie talk about her trips downtown, nodding seriously like she was reporting on matters of international importance. He listened to Skipper describe every movie he'd seen at the Roosevelt Theater, asking questions about the plots and the cowboys and the monsters. He listened to me talk about fishing with Grandpa, and his eyes lit up. "Green trout," he said. "Man, I ain't had green trout in I don't know how long. They got fish in Japan, but they ain't the same. They got this thing called sushi, where they eat the fish raw. Can you believe that? Raw." I told them, I said, "Y'all need to come to Louisiana. Let me show you how to cook a fish proper." But they just smile and bow and keep eating they raw fish. "You been eating raw fish, Louis?" Mama asked, her eyebrows raised. "I tried it once," he admitted. "Wasn't terrible. Wasn't good neither. Mostly it just made me homesick for a proper fish fry." After lunch, Daddy pulled me aside on the porch. The afternoon heat was building, cicadas screaming in the trees, and we sat on the swing together, pushing it back and forth with our feet. "Your mama tells me you've been sick," he said quietly. I nodded, not wanting to talk about it, not wanting to think about the chorea or the shots or the way my body sometimes felt like it didn't belong to me. "That's tough, son. That's real tough." He put his arm around my shoulders. "But you know what? You're tougher. You're a Thibodeau. And we Thibodeaus, we don't quit. We don't give up. We just keep going. You understand?" "Yes, sir. Your grandpa been taking you fishin'." "That's good. That's real good. Fishin' is good for the soul. Clears your head, you know. Helps you remember what's important." He was quiet for a moment, the swing creaking. "I'm gonna be here for a month, and we gonna do some things together. You and me. We gonna make some memories. That sound good?" "Yes, sir," I said again, and this time I meant it with my whole heart. Adventures in agriculture. The next few days were a blur of activity. Daddy had a month, and he intended to use every minute of it. He took Mama out to dinner at the Battle House Hotel, just the two of them, and Grandma watched us kids. He took all of us to the beach at Gulf Shores, where we swam in the warm green water and built sandcastles and ate boiled shrimp until we thought we'd burst. He went with Grandpa to his Masonic Lodge meeting and came back late, smelling like cigars and whiskey, laughing about something Grandpa had said. But mostly, he threw himself into the rhythms of life in Mobile, helping out however he could, making himself useful. One of the ways he helped was by driving Grandma out to the vegetable farms on the outskirts of town. Grandma was a canning fiend. She put up everything that could be put up, and some things that probably shouldn't have been. Her pantry was lined with jars of tomatoes, beans, okra, pickles, relishes, jams, jellies, and preserves. She had a system, a schedule, a whole philosophy of preservation that would have impressed the Department of Agriculture. "Waste not, want not," she'd say, which was her answer to pretty much everything. So Daddy would load her and us kids into the Hudson, our Hudson, not Grandpa's, and we'd drive out to farms where you could pick your own vegetables for a fraction of what they cost in stores. These were small operations, family farms where the owners knew Grandma by name and would show her to the best rows, the ones where the tomatoes were ripest or the beans were most tender. I remember one farm in particular, run by a man named Mr. Callahan, who had a face like a dried apple and hands that looked like they'd been carved from wood. He grew the best tomatoes in Mobile County, big, red, heavy things that smelled like summer itself. Grandma would walk the rows with him, discussing the weather and the soil and the prospects for the fall crop, while Daddy and us kids picked. "Gentle now," Daddy would say, showing us how to twist the tomato just so, how to check for soft spots, how to lay them carefully in the basket so they wouldn't bruise. "A tomato. She's a delicate lady. You got to treat her with respect." Marie would roll her eyes at this, but she'd be gentle anyway. Skipper would try to eat more than he picked, getting tomato juice all down his shirt. And I'd work steadily, filling basket after basket, enjoying the feel of the sun on my back and the smell of the tomato plants and the simple satisfaction of doing something useful. We'd come home with the Hudson loaded down bushels of tomatoes, bags of beans, baskets of okra and squash and cucumbers. Grandma would take over the kitchen, and for the next few days, the house would smell like vinegar and sugar and cooking vegetables. She'd stand at the stove for hours, stirring pots, filling jars, processing everything in the big pressure canner that hissed and rattled like it might explode at any moment. Daddy would help her, which surprised me. He'd peel peaches for her peach preserves, his knife flashing quick and sure, the peels coming off in long spirals. He'd pit cherries for her cherry jam, his fingers stained red by the end. He'd help her make fig preserves from the figs in the backyard, stirring the pot while she added sugar and lemon juice, testing the consistency on a cold plate. "You learned to cook in the Air Force?" Grandma asked him one day, watching him work. "Non, madame," he said. "I learned to cook from my mama, back in Louisiana. She said, a man who can't cook is a man who can't take care of himself. And a man who can't take care of himself ain't much of a man." Grandma nodded approvingly. "Your mama was a wise woman." "Yes, ma'am, she was. She still is, when she ain't scaring me half to death by getting sick." The jars would line up on the counter, dozens of them, their lids popping as they sealed, and Grandma would label each one with the date and contents in her careful handwriting. Then they'd go down to the pantry, added to the rows and rows of jars already there, a hedge against winter, against hard times, against whatever the future might bring. "You never know," Grandma would say, surveying her stores with satisfaction. "You just never know." Willie Maston's fishing camp. But the real adventure started when Daddy took me to Willie Maston's fishing camp out on the causeway. The causeway was a narrow strip of road that ran across Mobile Bay, connecting Mobile to the eastern shore. In 1950, there wasn't much out there, just water and sky and a few scattered businesses that catered to fishermen and travelers. Willie Maston's place was one of them, a ramshackle collection of buildings perched on pilings over the water, with a dock that stretched out into the bay, and a sign that said, "Willie's Bait Tackle Boats Cold Beer." Willie himself was a character straight out of a Mark Twain story, a lean, leathery man with a face like a dried tobacco leaf, and a voice that sounded like he gargled with gravel every morning. He'd been running the fishing camp since before the war, and he knew every fisherman, every trapper, every character within 50 miles. When Daddy pulled up in the Hudson that first Saturday morning, Willie came out of the main building wiping his hands on a rag, squinting against the sun. "Well, I'll be goddamned," he said. "Louis Thibodeau. Heard you was in Japan." "I was," Daddy said, getting out of the car. "Still am, technically. Just home, on leave, for a spell." "And you came to see me? I'm touched. Truly touched." Willie grinned, showing teeth stained brown from chewing tobacco. "You gonna cook for me again?" "Might could," Daddy said. "If you still got trappers coming around." Trappers, fishermen, every kind of character you can imagine. And they all remember your gumbo. Been askin' after you. Matter of fact. This was news to me. I looked up at Daddy, who was grinning now, and he ruffled my hair. "Before I shipped out," he explained, "I used to come out here on weekends and cook gumbo for Willie's customers. Muskrat and nutria gumbo mostly. It was good for business." "Good for business?" Willie snorted. "Hell, Louie, you doubled my weekend traffic. Folks would drive from Pensacola just to get a bowl of your gumbo. I had people begging me for the recipe, and I had to tell them I didn't know it. It was all in your head. Still is, Daddy said. And I reckon I could cook up a batch this afternoon if you got the ingredients. I got nutria in the freezer, Willie said. Fresh trapped yesterday. And I got everything else you need. You just say the word. So it was settled. Daddy would cook gumbo at Willie's fishing camp, and I would be his assistant. It felt like being initiated into some kind of secret society, like I was being let in on mysteries that most kids never got to see. The camp itself was a wonderland for a 9-year-old boy. The main building housed a small store where Willie sold tackle, bait, ice, beer, and sandwiches. The walls were covered with photographs of people holding fish, some of them recent, some of them so old they'd faded to sepia. There were mounted fish on the walls, too. A huge tarpon, a bull redfish, a shark with teeth like knives. Behind the store was a kitchen, just a room, with a stove, a sink, and a long counter. And behind that was a screened porch, where people could sit and eat and look out over the water. The dock stretched out from there, with boat slips on either side and a cleaning station at the end where you could gut your catch and throw the scraps to the crabs and catfish that swarmed below. Willie rented boats, flat-bottom skiffs with small outboard motors. Just like Grandpa's, he sold bait, bull minnows in aerated tanks, shiners in buckets, crickets in wire cages for the people who wanted to catch bull brem. He sold tackle, hooks and sinkers and line and lures, everything a fisherman might need. And now, apparently, he was going to sell Daddy's gumbo, the gospel according to Daddy. Cooking gumbo, I learned that day, was not like cooking anything else. It was part chemistry, part art, part voodoo. Daddy approached it with the seriousness of a priest preparing for Mass. First, the roux. He heated oil in a big cast-iron pot, Willie's biggest pot, the one that could hold 5 gallons, and added flour, stirring constantly with a wooden spoon. You can't stop stirring, he told me. Not for a second. You stop stirring, the roux burns, and if the roux burns, you got to throw the whole thing out and start over. A burnt roux, that's a tragedy. That's a sin against God and nature. He stirred for what felt like hours, the mixture going from white to tan to brown to a deep chocolate color. The smell filled the kitchen, rich and nutty and complex. His arm never stopped moving, the spoon scraping the bottom of the pot in steady circles. This is the foundation, he said. Everything else, it builds on this. You get the roux right, the gumbo gonna be good. You mess up the roux, don't matter what else you do. When the roux was the right color, like a copper penny, Daddy said he added the Holy Trinity, onions, celery, and bell peppers, all chopped fine. They sizzled and steamed, and the smell got even better. Then garlic, lots of it, and the nutria meat that Willie had thawed out. Nutria, if you don't know, is a big rodent that looks like a beaver crossed with a rat. They're swamp creatures, vegetarians, and their meat is dark and rich and surprisingly good if you cook it right. Trappers caught them for their pelts, and the meat was usually just a bonus. Daddy browned the nutria in the roux, then added water, bay leaves, thyme, cayenne pepper, salt, and black pepper. He tasted, adjusted, tasted again. Gumbo, she's got to have layers, he said. You taste it. You should taste something different every time. First the heat, then the meat, then the vegetables, then the spices. It should be like a story, you know, with a beginning and a middle and an end. He let it simmer for hours, the pot bubbling gently, the smell drifting out through the screens and across the water, and people started showing up. First came a couple of trappers, rough-looking men in rubber boots and stained jackets, who'd heard somehow that Louis Thibodeau was back and cooking. Then came some fishermen who'd been out on the bay since dawn. Then came people who just seemed to materialize out of nowhere, drawn by the smell and the word of mouth and the promise of something special. By mid-afternoon, the screened porch was packed. Willie was selling beer as fast as he could hand it out. Daddy was ladling gumbo into bowls, serving it over rice, and people were eating and laughing and telling stories. The gumbo was perfect, spicy and rich and complex, with the nutria meat falling apart tender and the vegetables melted into the sauce. "Louis, you son of a bitch," one old trapper said, his bowl already empty. "I forgot how good this was. I purely forgot." "Language," Daddy said mildly, nodding toward me. Sorry. But damn, Louis, damn." I sat on the dock with my own bowl of gumbo, my legs dangling over the water, and watched the sun start its descent toward the western shore. The gumbo was too spicy for me. It made my eyes water and my nose run, but I ate it anyway because Daddy had made it, and because it felt important somehow, like I was participating in something bigger than just a meal. Willie came and sat beside me, his own bowl in hand. "Your daddy's a good man," he said. "You know that?" "Yes, sir." He could have stayed in Louisiana, worked in the oil fields or the refineries, made good money. But he joined up, served his country, and now he's over there in Japan doing whatever it is they do at that airbase. That takes character. I nodded, not sure what to say. "And he can cook," Willie continued. "That's a rare combination character in cookin'. You remember that?" "Yes, sir, I will." We sat there in comfortable silence, eating our gumbo, watching the water. A pelican flew by, low and slow, its wings barely moving. In the distance, a boat was heading in, probably done for the day. The sun was turning the bay into liquid gold. "You fish much?" Willie asked. "Yes, sir. With my grandpa. We go to Dog River mostly, sometimes Ward's Canal." "Catch anything?" "Green trout. Mostly. Some brem." "You any good?" I shrugged. "I'm okay, I guess." Willie studied me for a moment, then nodded like he'd made a decision. "Tell you what, you come out here with your daddy, you can fish off my dock anytime you want. No charge. I got cane poles in the shed, and you can use whatever bait you need. Might even teach you to shoot my 4-10 shotgun. You're interested." My heart jumped. "Really? Really? But you gotta promise me something." "What?" "You gotta promise me you'll be careful. And you gotta promise me you'll listen when I tell you something. I don't need your mama coming out here raising hell because you shot yourself in the foot or fell off the dock or something. Deal?" "Deal," I said, and we shook on it, his hand rough and calloused against mine. Days at Willie's. After that, Willie's fishing camp became my second home. Daddy would drive me out there 2 or 3 times a week, and while he cooked gumbo or helped Willie with repairs, or just sat around drinking beer and telling lies with the old-timers, I'd fish off the dock. Willie set me up with a cane pole, a long, flexible bamboo pole with line tied to the tip and a cork bobber about 3 feet up from the hook. It was simple fishing, the kind where you didn't need to think too much, where you could just sit and watch the cork and let your mind wander. I tried everything for bait: corn kernels, which the brem loved; bacon, which attracted catfish; crickets, which caught both brem and small bass; bull minnows, which sometimes got hit by Spanish mackerel or small redfish. I even tried pieces of the nutria meat from Daddy's gumbo, and damned if it didn't work, caught a nice green trout on nutria one afternoon, and Willie laughed so hard he nearly fell off the dock. "That fish," he said, wiping his eyes, "that fish just ate his cousin. That's some kind of cannibalism right there." The fishing was good, but it was more than just the fishing. It was the whole experience: the smell of the salt air, the cry of the gulls, the slap of the water against the pilings. It was watching the boats come and go, seeing what people caught, hearing their stories. It was being part of a community of people who understood that fishing wasn't really about catching fish. It was about being out there, being present, being alive. Willie kept his word about teaching me to shoot. He had an old 4-10 shotgun, a single-shot break action that was perfect for a kid, and one afternoon, he took me out to a marshy area behind the camp where the nutria liked to hang out. "Now listen," he said, showing me how to load the gun, how to hold it, how to aim. A 4-10. She don't have much kick, but she's still a gun. You treat every gun like it's loaded, even when you know it ain't. You never point it at anything you don't intend to shoot, and you always know what's behind your target. Understand?" "Yes, sir." Good. Now we're hunting nutria. They're rodents, they're pests, and they're good eatin' if you cook 'em right. Your daddy needs 'em for his gumbo, so we're doing him a favor. But you still got to respect the animal. You make a clean shot, you make it quick. No sufferin'. That's the rule. We crept through the marsh grass, Willie moving quiet as a cat despite his age. Me, trying to follow his example. He'd point out signs, tracks in the mud, chewed vegetation, slides where the nutria entered and exited the water. Then he'd freeze, holding up his hand, and I'd freeze too. There, he whispered, pointing. I saw it a nutria at the water's edge, its orange teeth working on some kind of root. It was bigger than I expected, maybe 15 pounds, with coarse brown fur and a long rat-like tail. Take your time, Willie whispered. Breathe. Aim for the head or the chest. Squeeze the trigger. Don't pull it. I raised the 410, sighted down the barrel, tried to steady my breathing. The nutria kept eating. Oblivious. My heart was pounding. The gun felt heavy in my hands. I squeezed the trigger. The gun kicked against my shoulder, not much, but enough to surprise me. The nutria jerked once and went still. Willie clapped me on the back. Clean shot, he said. Good job, boy. Real good job. We retrieved the nutria, and Willie showed me how to field dress it, how to skin it, how to prepare it for cooking. It was messy work, and part of me felt bad about killing the animal, but another part of me felt proud. I'd done something difficult. I'd done something useful. I'd provided meat for Daddy's gumbo. That night, when Daddy cooked with the nutria I'd shot, he made a big deal about it, told everyone at the camp that his son had bagged the main ingredient, that I was turning into a real hunter. The old-timers nodded approvingly, and I felt 10 feet tall. The rhythm of summer. The days fell into a pattern. Mornings, I'd often go fishing with Grandpa on Dog River, just the two of us in his boat, chasing green trout in the lily pads. Afternoons, if Daddy was going to Willie's, I'd go with him, fishing off the dock or hunting nutria in the marsh. Evenings, we'd all gather at Grandma's table for dinner, whatever she'd cooked, which was always too much and always delicious. The chorea was still there, still making my muscles twitch and jerk, still requiring those awful shots twice a week, but somehow it bothered me less. Maybe it was because I was busy, distracted by fishing and hunting and helping Daddy. Maybe it was because I was surrounded by people who loved me and didn't make a big deal about my condition. Or maybe it was just that I was 9 years old and resilient in the way that kids are able to adapt to almost anything if you give them enough time. Marie was still mad about the hamster, though she'd stopped crying about it. She'd look at me sometimes with this expression that was half anger, half hurt, and I'd feel the guilt twist in my stomach. I wanted to tell her the truth, wanted to confess, but I couldn't find the words, so I just avoided her when I could, and tried to be extra nice when I couldn't. Skipper had mostly forgotten about Buddy. He'd moved on to other obsessions, comic books, mostly, and a toy truck that Daddy had brought him from Japan. He'd push that truck around the yard for hours, making engine noises, creating elaborate scenarios, involving crashes and rescues, and adventures. Mama seemed lighter somehow, happier. Having Daddy home, even temporarily, had lifted some weight off her shoulders. She'd laugh more, sing while she did the dishes, dance with him in the kitchen when a good song came on the radio. Watching them together, I understood for the first time that they were people, not just my parents, that they had their own relationship, their own love story, their own private world that existed separate from us kids. Grandma kept canning. The pantry shelves filled up with jars, tomatoes, beans, pickles, relishes, jams, jellies, preserves. She was preparing for winter, for our departure, for whatever came next. You never know, she'd say, and we'd all nod. Because by now, we understood that this was her way of showing love, of taking care of us, of making sure we'd be okay, no matter what. Grandpa kept working his night shifts at the railroad, kept taking me fishing when he could, kept dispensing his particular brand of wisdom. A man needs 3 things. He told me one morning as we motored across Dog River. He needs work that matters, people he loves, and a place where he can be quiet. You got those three things, you got everything. And Daddy was everywhere at once, it seemed. Helping Grandma in the kitchen, helping Grandpa with repairs around the house, taking Mama out on dates, playing with us kids, cooking gumbo at Willie's, telling stories about Japan and the Air Force and his childhood in Louisiana. He was making up for lost time, cramming a year's worth of fathering into 30 days. You know, I got to go back, he told me one night, when we were sitting on the porch, just the two of us. The fireflies were out, blinking in the darkness like tiny stars. You understand that, right? Yes, sir. And you know that eventually, y'all gonna come join me. Your mama and you kids, you'll fly over to Japan, and we'll all be together again. It might take a few more months, but it's gonna happen. Yes, sir. But until then, you got to be the man of the family here. You got to help your mama, help your grandparents, look after your brother and sister. Can you do that? I wanted to say that I was only 9, that I was sick, that I didn't know how to be the man of anything. But I looked at his face in the dim light from the window, saw the trust there, the confidence, and I nodded. Yes, sir. I can do that. I know you can, he said, and pulled me close. You're stronger than you think, son, stronger than you know. The last week, the month went by too fast, the way good things always do. Before I knew it, Daddy was down to his last week, then his last few days, then his last day. That final Saturday, he cooked one more batch of gumbo at Willie's. It seemed like half of Mobile showed up, trappers and fishermen, and people who'd heard about the Cajun airman who could cook like an angel. Willie had to set up extra tables on the dock, and even then, people were standing, sitting on the railings, perching wherever they could find space. The gumbo was perfect, maybe the best Daddy had ever made. He'd put everything into it, all his skill, all his love, all his knowledge of spices and timing, and that indefinable something that separates good cooking from great cooking. People ate in reverent silence, then came back for seconds, then thirds. Louis, Willie said, pulling him aside, I'm gonna miss you, you son of a bitch. Business ain't gonna be the same without you. You'll be fine, Daddy said. You was doing fine before I showed up. Yeah, but I was doing better with you here. Willie shook his hand, then pulled him into a hug. You take care of yourself over there in Japan. And you come back safe, you hear? I hear. I fished off the dock that afternoon, but my heart wasn't in it. I kept thinking about Daddy leaving, about going back to waiting, about the house feeling empty again. I caught a nice green trout, maybe 3 pounds, a real beauty, but even that didn't cheer me up much. Daddy came and sat beside me, his own fishing pole in hand. We fished together in silence for a while, the sun warm on our backs, the water lapping against the pilings. You gonna be okay? He asked finally. Yes, sir. You gonna keep fishing with your grandpa? Yes, sir. You gonna help your mama and look after your brother and sister? Yes, sir. You gonna keep practicing with that 4 to 10? Willie says you're a natural. Yes, sir. He reeled in his line, set down his pole, and turned to face me. Listen to me, son. This ain't forever. This separation, this waiting, it ain't forever. Pretty soon, y'all gonna be with me in Japan, and we gonna be a family again, all together. And until then, you got your grandparents, and they love you, and they gonna take care of you. You understand? Yes, sir. And the Korea, that ain't forever neither. Dr. Henderson says, you're getting better. Says the shots are working. You just gotta be patient. Gotta keep fighting. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Good. He put his arm around my shoulders. I'm proud of you. You know that? I'm proud of the way you've handled everything. You're gonna be fine. Better than fine. You're gonna be great. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that everything would work out, that we'd all be together soon, that the Korea would go away, that life would be normal again. But I was 9 years old, and I'd learned that life doesn't always work out the way you want it to, that sometimes people leave and don't come back, that sometimes things break and can't be fixed. But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded and said, "Thank you, Daddy." And we went back to fishing. Sunday morning. Daddy left on a Sunday morning. His flight was out of Mobile Regional Airport at noon, which meant we had to leave the house by 10. Grandma made a big breakfast, eggs, bacon, grits, biscuits, the works, but nobody ate much. We just pushed the food around our plates and tried not to look at the clock. When it was time to go, we all piled into the Hudson, Mama, Daddy, me, Marie, Skipper, and Grandpa, who was driving. Grandma stayed home, saying she didn't like goodbyes, but I think she just didn't want us to see her cry. The airport was small, just a single terminal building and a couple of runways. Daddy's plane was already there, a silver DC-3 that would take him to Atlanta, then to California, then across the Pacific, back to Japan. We stood on the tarmac, the sun already hot even though it was only mid-morning, and said our goodbyes. Daddy hugged Marie and Skipper, told them to be good, to help Mama, to write him letters. He shook Grandpa's hand, then pulled him into a hug. "Thank you," he said, "for everything, for taking care of my family. That's what family does," Grandpa said gruffly. Then Daddy turned to me. He knelt down so we were eye to eye, and he put his hands on my shoulders. "You remember what I told you," he said. "You're the man of the family until I get back. You take care of your mama and your brother and sister. You keep fishing with your grandpa. You keep fighting that Korea, and you write me letters. Tell me everything that's happening. Can you do all that?" "Yes, sir." "Good." He pulled me into a hug, and I could feel his heart beating against my chest, could smell his aftershave and the starch in his uniform. "I love you, son. Don't you ever forget that." "I love you too, Daddy." Finally, he turned to Mama. They held each other for a long time, not saying anything, just holding on. When they finally pulled apart, Mama's face was wet with tears, but she was smiling. 30 days wasn't enough," she said. "Non-chair, it wasn't. But it's what we got, and we made the most of it, yeah? Yeah. I'll write every week. And pretty soon, you'll get your orders, and you'll come join me, and we'll be together for good. Promise?" "Promise." One more kiss, one more hug, and then he was walking toward the plane, his duffel bag over his shoulder. He turned at the stairs and waved, and we all waved back. Then he climbed aboard and disappeared inside. We stood there and watched the plane taxi to the runway, watched it turn and pause, watched it accelerate down the concrete and lift into the air. We watched until it was just a speck in the sky, and then until it wasn't even that, just gone. "Come on," Grandpa said gently. "Let's go home." After. The house felt empty after Daddy left, like something vital had been removed. We went back to our routines, Grandpa working his night shifts, Grandma canning, Marie and Skipper going downtown with Grandma, me fishing with Grandpa. But it all felt different now, muted somehow, like we were just going through the motions. The Korea got worse for a while. The stress of Daddy leaving, maybe, or just the natural progression of the disease. My muscles twitched and jerked more, and the shots seemed to make me sicker. There were days when I could barely get out of bed, when even the thought of fishing made me tired. But I kept going. I kept taking the shots, kept fighting, kept doing what Daddy had told me to do. I helped Mama around the house. I looked after Skipper, made sure he didn't get into too much trouble. I even tried to be nicer to Marie, though she still looked at me sometimes with that expression that said she knew what I'd done to Buddy the hamster. Grandpa kept taking me fishing. Some mornings I was too sick to go, but when I could, I did. We'd motor out to Dog River in the early light, looking for lily pads and green trout, and Grandpa would tell me stories about his own father, about growing up in Mobile in the early 1900s, about how the world had changed and how it had stayed the same. "The important things don't change," he'd say. "Family, love, doing right by people, them things, they're eternal. Everything else is just noise." I went back to Willie's a few times, fishing off the dock, practicing with the 4 to 10. Willie was kind to me, patient, treating me like I was somebody important rather than just a sick kid whose father had gone back to Japan. He taught me things: how to tie better knots, how to read the water, how to predict where the fish would be based on the tide and the wind and the time of day. "Your daddy's a good man," he told me one afternoon. And you're gonna be a good man too. I can tell. How can you tell? Because you show up. Because you keep trying, even when things are hard. Because you treat people with respect and you don't complain. Them things matter. August came, and with it, the news we'd been waiting for. Our orders had come through. We'd be leaving for Japan in September, flying out of California, joining Daddy at Itazuki. Mama cried when she got the telegram, but they were happy tears this time. We were going to be a family again. The last few weeks in Mobile were a blur of preparations and goodbyes. Grandma went into overdrive, making sure we had everything we needed, packing boxes of her preserves for us to take, cooking our favorite meals one last time. Grandpa took me fishing every chance he got, like he was trying to cram a lifetime of fishing trips into a few weeks. On my last day in Mobile, Grandpa and I went to Dog River one final time. We caught a mess of green trout, and Grandpa cleaned them on the bank like always, and we sat under the oak tree and talked. "You gonna remember what I taught you?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "You gonna keep fishing, even in Japan? If they got fish there?" "Yes, sir. They got fish everywhere, boy. You just gotta know where to look." He was quiet for a moment, watching the water. "You're gonna be fine. You and your mama and your brother and sister, you're gonna be just fine. And your daddy, he's gonna take care of you. But you remember, you always got a home here. You always got family here. You need anything, you come back, you hear?" "Yes, sir." "Good." He stood up, brushed off his pants. "Now let's get these fish home to your grandmother. She's gonna want to cook 'em up for your last supper." Epilogue. That was 73 years ago now. I'm an old man myself, older than Grandpa was that summer, and most of the people in this story are gone. Daddy came home from Japan eventually, served another 20 years in the Air Force, retired as a master sergeant. He died in 1989, still cooking gumbo, still speaking with that Cajun accent, still calling Mama Chair. Mama followed him in 2003. Grandpa and Grandma Boudreaux are long gone, buried in the same cemetery where we used to collect earthworms for Willie Maston. Willie's fishing camp is gone too, torn down years ago to make room for condos and restaurants and all the development that came to the causeway. The Roosevelt Theater is gone. The farms where we picked vegetables are now subdivisions. The Mobile I knew in 1950 exists only in memory now, and in the memories of a few other old-timers who remember when the city was smaller, slower, more connected to the water and the land. The Korea eventually went away, just like Dr. Henderson said it would. The shots worked, or I outgrew it, or maybe I just got lucky. I still twitch sometimes when I'm tired or stressed, but nothing like it was that summer. Marie eventually forgave me for the hamster incident. It took about 40 years, but she forgave me. We laughed about it at a family reunion, though her laugh had an edge to it that said she hadn't completely forgotten. Skipper never knew the truth. I never told him. Some secrets you take to the grave. I still fish. I still live in Mobile now, and I go out on the Gulf whenever I can, chasing whatever's biting: redfish, trout, snapper, grouper. I use modern equipment now, fancy rods and reels and electronics that would have amazed Grandpa, but sometimes I'll use a cane pole, just for old time's sake. And when I do, when I'm sitting there watching the cork bob in the water, I can almost hear Grandpa's voice. "Easy now. You ain't throwing rocks at a tin can. You're inviting him to dinner." I never learned to cook gumbo like Daddy did. I tried a few times, but it never came out right. The roux would burn, or the spices would be off, or it would just lack that indefinable something that made his gumbo special. Maybe you can't learn that kind of magic. Maybe it dies with the person who has it. But I remember. I remember that summer in Mobile, waiting for Daddy, fishing with Grandpa, learning to shoot Willie's 4 to 10, eating Grandma's cooking, feeling the heat and the love and the particular texture of life in that time and place. I remember the smell of gumbo cooking, the sound of the screen door singing its 2-note song, the feel of a green trout fighting on the end of my line. I remember being 9 years old and sick and scared and loved. I remember being part of something bigger than myself, a family, a community, a web of connections that held me up when I couldn't stand on my own. And I remember Daddy kneeling on the tarmac, his hands on my shoulders, telling me I was stronger than I knew. He was right about that. We're all stronger than we know. We just need someone to believe in us, to show us how to tie the knots and read the water and keep going even when things are hard. That's what that summer taught me. That's what I carry with me still, all these years later. Not just the memories of fishing and gumbo and hot Alabama days, but the deeper lessons about family and love and resilience, about showing up, about doing right by people, about the important things that don't change. Grandpa was right. The important things don't change. Family, love, doing right by people. Them things, they're eternal. Everything else is just noise. The end. I hope you like this story by Sylvester Fourroux. Be sure to like and subscribe to Sco's Media YouTube channel for more stories of this type.